Good morning, everyone, or morning-ish, depending on where you're watching us from, and welcome to our third Breakfast Club. This one is pretty special, so we did a little wardrobe coordinating in advance to get a bunch of plants and animals on your screen. Because today, even if you're stuck inside, we are going to bring the outdoors to you and tell you a little bit about how you can give something back to it in ways that are really fun and actually occasionally pretty mind-blowing. So with us today are the co-directors of the Citizen Science Program at the California Academy of Sciences, Dr. Rebecca Johnson and Alison Young. Hi, you two.
Hey there. Hi, good morning.
That was me saying hi to you. Hi, you two.
Hi, Laurel.
And so we're going to get right to it today. Oh, I think we've got a delay. That's going to be embarrassing. That's going to be really embarrassing later.
Awesome. We do have a little delay.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll get out of here. I'll get out of here quickly then. We have a lot to share anyways, but before I hand it over, just a reminder to people watching that if you're watching it live, whether on Facebook or YouTube, you can, oh man, this one's like very, very professional. We're just getting better as we continue to do but yes, if you're watching it live, you can ask questions anytime at all, just by leaving them in the comment section. And we'll collect those throughout the broadcast, circle back at the end to ask Alison and Rebecca as many of them as we can. And also just feel free to say hi and where you're watching from, because that's great too. With that, snapping nature photos for science and conservation in your own backyard or neighborhood. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurel. And thanks everybody for tuning in. So yeah, Rebecca and I are the co-directors of the Citizen Science Program at the California Academy of Sciences. And our kind of role, what we do, is all about designing programs and campaigns and events to get people outside, documenting the nature all around them. And hopefully through that process, also connecting to their local nature and meeting other people who are also super interested in nature as well. So the main platform that we use, the one we're going to introduce here, is iNaturalist. This is the platform that we ask people to collect data with. And if you're not familiar with iNaturalist, hopefully this will be a nice introduction to it. So iNaturalist is both a platform and a website. They're both free. And where the main things that you do on iNaturalist is it's a chance for you to take photos of the nature that you see around you. You can get identification, so help with IDs on what it is that you saw. You can keep track of everything you've ever seen, which is pretty cool. And you can also explore and see what other people are finding anywhere in the world. And the way it generally works is that it basically takes the photos you take and turns them into data. So that process is basically you have a chance to go out and you take a photo, try to get as good of a photo as you can of the thing that you're taking, that you're interested in finding more about. When you take the photo, your phone, if you're using the app, and your phone, if you're just taking photos, records your location and the date, which is great. So it's telling us where you found that species and also when you found it, which is really important. And then the next piece on turning that photograph into data is we have to figure out what species it is. And so the first step of that is that iNaturalist has some computer vision, or some people call it artificial intelligence, that actually will give you some suggestions on what it is that it thinks that you saw. So you can see in this case, this is a photo that Rebecca took of this flower that she saw on the coast. You can see back in June of 2017. And when she presses that button that says, "What did you see? View suggestions," iNaturalist is actually coming up and saying, "Well, we're pretty sure it's in this genus." And then it gives you its top 10 species suggestions. And you can see that in those suggestions, it's saying that some of them are visually similar, so they look like the photo that Rebecca took, and they've been seen nearby. And those are usually pretty good choices for an initial identification on what it is that you saw. So you can look through those whole list of 10. You can learn more about those species by pressing it. You can see other photos of it. But hopefully you can then pick from those suggestions and decide, this looks like the right identification. Or if you know what it is, you can type it in. Or if nothing looks right, you could just say, I know this is a plant, so I'm just going to type that in. That's totally fine too. Once you've added an ID, you hit share. If you're using an Android, there's a little check button up in the top corner of the app, and that uploads it to iNaturalist. So here's that same observation that Rebecca made, but actually on the website itself. The app is great for taking photos and making observations, but we really suggest checking out the website for all this other cool stuff that you can do on it. So looking at that observation on the website, you can see that it's showing us Rebecca's photo. It's showing us where she saw it. It has a little pin on the map. We see when she took that photo, June 28th of 2017, and you can see that she picked that seaside daisy as her first choice, the very first suggestion that iNaturalist gave. And then 2 other people have gone in and agreed that, yes, this is a seaside daisy. And when people agree with your identification, when about 2/3 of the people who've added an ID agree what it is, that makes this what we call a research grade observation. And every observation has these data quality assessment attached to it, and you can see them on the website. And basically, a research grade observation, it has a photo, so there's evidence of the organism. It has what looks like an accurate location, an accurate date. It's a wild organism. You can see that on that list right there too. And then 2/3 of the people who've added an ID agree what it is. And that makes this a research grade observation. And so the power of iNaturalist is not just the app and the artificial intelligence, it's really the fact that iNaturalist is a social network, that there's hundreds of thousands of people using this platform, not only to take photos and make observations, but they're also on there and they can help provide identifications. So that when you upload a photo and you put an ID on it, the community can chime in and say, yeah, that totally looks like the right ID. They can correct a misidentification. Or if Rebecca had just uploaded that as a plant, then the community could have helped get it down to species. And so the real power of iNat is the community itself. And so to give you more of an example of how the community can chime in on your observations, this is a photo that I took, also back in 2016, an old photo of mine. We can see that this is a hedgerow hair streak. But when I first uploaded it, you can see up at the very top there, I first uploaded this, all I could say is I knew it was a butterfly. I'm a marine biologist. I saw this up in the forest in Northern California. I don't know my butterfly species all that well, so I could say, I know this is a butterfly, and that's how I uploaded it. But then you can see people started chiming in and helping to refine the identification from butterfly down to species. So the next person that chimed in knew what family it belonged in. People came in, you can actually tag other people. You can see someone here actually said, hey, this person knows their butterflies. They tagged them, they put their iNaturalist name and said, hey, come and look at this. Can you help us figure out what it is? And then more and more people helped to refine it. Someone knew with the subfamily. And eventually people kind of gathered around this idea that this is a hedgerow hair streak. People talked about what they were seeing. They agreed it was a hedgerow hair streak. I chimed in. You can thank people for leaving UIDs. So I chimed in and thanked them for it. And now this is a research grade observation of a hedgerow hair streak. So sometimes people just come in and leave UIDs, but the nice thing is too is that you can have conversations with people and find out how they know what one species is versus another. They can help, refine those IDs. And you also get to meet people who are interested in this species like you were as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca to talk a little bit about how the data on iNaturalist are used.
All right, thanks so much, Alison. We just saw a great example of how Alison learned about what kind of butterfly she saw in that picture. And that's one of the most amazing things about iNat. But every time you share that picture, not only can you learn more about the nature all around you, but you're contributing to this global database of when and where species are found, which is iNaturalist. So like Alison said, hundreds of thousands of people, almost 1 million actually, getting close to 1 million people have made and shared observations on iNaturalist. And together, those people have made over 30 million observations. And so anyone can go onto iNaturalist and explore all of those data. And you can see that here. And you can zoom in and click any single observation and learn about what people saw. But once those observations that everyone shares become research grade, like Alison just showed us for that butterfly, once the community agrees on that identification, those observations are shared with the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, which is a clearinghouse for species occurrence data. A lot of the data, actually right now, most of the new data showing up on GBIF is from iNaturalist or eBird, which is another citizen science platform just focusing on birds. But those data are combined on GBIF with Natural History Museum specimen data. Next slide, Alison. So the kind of specimens that we have in our collections at the California Academy of Sciences, like this specimen of a California poppy from our herbarium, from our botany collections. This is the actual plant that was collected and pressed. And this specimen has all of the information, all of the same information that an iNaturalist observation has. It has the name of the collector, the person who found this plant, when and where they collected it, and it has a name. The difference is this is an actual specimen, so we can do all kinds of different research on this specimen. We can look at its DNA, we can look at its seeds, we can look at its anatomy and its structures. With an iNaturalist observation, we can't do that, but we know, we have evidence that a species occurred in a certain place at a certain time. And all of these data, next, are the same as what we see in an iNaturalist observation. And together, Natural History Museum specimen data and the data that we all collect through iNaturalist, using iNaturalist, help scientists and land managers and people interested in conservation and where plants and animals are found now, how that's changing because of climate change and habitat modification. They can go to GBIF and use all of these data together to answer really, really important questions. Next slide. And you can see that here are just a little snippet of all of the papers that were published just last year using iNaturalist data. So 225 papers, over that number, use these data to write scientific papers and to make really interesting decisions about how to manage land, and really helped us really understand biodiversity on our planet better. Next slide. And you can imagine that's kind of like the big data, right? Like how you look at all of these data together. A lot of the folks that we work with in our work are park managers, folks that run local and regional parks and have to manage those areas. And many parks have maps that look like this. This is a vegetation map. This is a map of what kinds of plant communities are found where in the park. Often these are made by folks that work in the park just by doing some plant surveys or by using satellite data. Most often it's satellite or mapped data. But when you have a map like this, you can't necessarily see where individual plants are found, and you can't really look closely at how things are changing. So next slide. So if you get a bunch of people on your land through events called BioBlitzes that Alison and I organize, or just by encouraging people that go to parks to make and share observations, you can get a more detailed or fine-scale map of where species are found in one place. So you can see each of these little pinpoints here are a different observation, and the colors correspond to whether it's a plant or a bird or a fungus, and those colors are used consistently on iNaturalist. And so these kinds of data that may have been taken by someone who was just on a hike with their family and were curious what that butterfly was, or may have been taken by the land manager or the environmental scientist that works on that land who really knows all the plants and animals, all of those data together can help us get a better idea of what's happening on the land at one time. One of the things that these data can also do, especially for managers, if there's a new introduced species that shows up on their land, they can find it immediately. Maybe they obviously can't take pictures all over their land, but their visitors can, and they can also keep track of threatened and endangered species. Next slide. Because they get a big list like this. So iNaturalist shows you on a map where all the observations were made, and it also shows you all of the species that have ever been seen or observed using iNaturalist in this one little parcel. And so you can see here, there have been 400 species that have been observed on in this Shiloh Ranch Regional Park. And these pictures are the iconic pictures from iNaturalist, so they're the really good photos. These aren't necessarily the photos that individual people took, but you can see they're listed here from most observed to least observed. So this really helps the managers and scientists that are interested in this place and visitors to this place understand what species are found there and what people are taking pictures of. And it gives them not only a species list of their place, but a species atlas, because they can see where these things are found. Next slide. And sometimes, you know, if people are using iNaturalist just as they're walking on the beach or walking around their neighborhood, sometimes you make discoveries that you weren't expecting to make. So this is one of our favorite examples that happened just last year, where this man was walking along the beach in Santa Barbara and found this huge fish washed up dead on the beach. And for those of us that live along the Pacific coast in California, there is a big fish that looks kind of like this, that's called a mola mola. Next slide. And so when he saw this fish, it kind of looks like just the head of a fish with weird fins, and it doesn't look like it has a tail, but this is the whole fish. So he saw this and he was like, yeah, this is a mola mola, and he uploaded it to iNaturalist. Next slide. And as he, you know, these conversations that happen on iNaturalist, like Alison showed you, people started having this conversation and said, well, like, I don't know. I mean, it looks like a mola mola, but there's something a little bit different about it. Next. And so people started tagging other people. You know, the collection manager that studies fishes at the South Australian Museum, and then tagged and included this woman, Marianne Nygaard, who was a student in Australia who had recently described a new species of mola. And she said, like, I'm pretty sure, like, this looks like this new fish that I described. Can you go back and take some more pictures, like more detailed pictures? Can you look at the scales? Can you look at these other parts for me? Next slide. And so they do this, and this keeps on going. The conversation keeps on going on and on and on. And someone finally says, like, holy mola, this is not a mola mola. This is a species called the hoodwinker mola. And this is exciting because this is a new record of this fish, and people had this big conversation and brought in experts just from one person's observation on a beach. But one of the most interesting things about this, not only was it like a new record and exciting, this was the first record of this species in the Northern Hemisphere. So it was described from the waters off New Zealand, and we found this observation was made here in Santa Barbara. So this is really, really important discovery for the understanding of the distribution of this fish. That was made just by someone who was curious and took a picture on the beach. And since this observation has been made, actually this fish has been observed off the coast of California more often and alive as well. So for us, this story just really demonstrates how being curious can help you feel more connected to your place where you live, other naturalists online, but can also help make really important discoveries. So I'm going to turn it back over to Alison.
Right. Thanks, Rebecca. So clearly, iNaturalist is something that you can use all over the world when you're out hiking to learn about your IDs, when you're out on the beach. But I'm sure many of you, like us right now, you can't necessarily go out to your beach or out to your local parks or things like that. Since we're all kind of, a lot of us are stuck inside in some variation or some form of sheltering in place right now. But the great thing is that it's not just about making observations of super interesting rare species. iNaturalist is really designed for you to share photos of species that you find everywhere, including in your house and in your backyard. And so we wanted to give a little introduction on, you know, how do you actually go about looking for the species that might live in your house or around your house as well. And one really quick thing that we want to point out is that iNaturalist is mostly about taking photos of wild things. And so the challenge here is not going to your backyard and taking a picture of like the beautiful flowers that you've planted, which I'm sure they're lovely. It's more about, can you find those wild species that are living in between those flowers, or the things that are living on, you know, using that flower as a habitat or as a food source. And so that's the challenge, is you're looking for the wild things in your area. And there's a couple other features when you make an observation on iNaturalist that we just want to point out really quickly. We have the Android screenshot on the left and the iPhone screenshot on the right, but those two arrows are pointing to the same thing on each of those screenshots. One is that you can change how visible your location is. And the second one is that you can also say, this thing actually isn't wild. Like I said, we really are encouraging folks to make observations of wild things. But if you take a photo of something that you know for sure isn't wild, that's okay. But the important thing is to mark it as such. And so you can see both on the Android and on the iPhone, they have this question about, is this captive or cultivated? And on the Android, you just check the box to say, yes, it is. And on the iPhone, you can switch it from no to yes. For that location visibility, if you decide to make a bunch of observations in and around your house, that's great. You can keep your location open, and that's totally fine. But if you're worried about having a cluster of observations right at your house, you can also obscure that. And so when you tap that feature, you can have an open location, which shows everybody the coordinates. You can have an obscured location, which means you can see the coordinates, but anyone else, it's obscured, basically like potentially by 22 kilometers. It's like a 0.2 degree box, but that means it's about 22 kilometers on either side. So it'll be somewhere in that box, but that's all that people can see about it. We do not recommend making your observations private. You'll be able to see your location, but then no one else will, and your observations will not be associated with any place at all, which makes them not very useful for answering scientific questions or things like that. If you obscure them, they're still pretty useful because we know that they're like within at least 22 kilometers, which is still a good, a good kind of accuracy bubble for us. But private just means that no one can actually see where you saw that. So if you're worried about making a bunch of observations around your house, we recommend changing your location to obscured instead of open. So first of all, looking for species inside your house. I love this graph. This is actually our curator of flies at the Academy, Michelle Troutwine. This is a project that she works on called the Arthropods of Your Home. Where they've gone into people's houses and vacuumed every corner and looked in all the windowsills and, under everything to try to find all of the insects and the spiders that live inside of people's houses. And they've discovered on average, there's about 93 species of arthropods that live in your house, which sounds like a lot, but luckily very few of them are any ones that you actually have to worry about. Most of them are quite benign, and most of them are pretty small too, so you probably don't even notice them. But we can challenge you to go and look for the ones that you can find in your house. And the thing I really love is that a lot of these things that live in your house, they're so commonly associated with human dwellings that their names actually reflect that. So these are all mostly photos that I've taken in my house. So over here we have a carpet beetle and a carpet moth. So these are clearly species that are often associated with carpets. These cute little fuzzy things are really tiny, but they're often called drain flies or bathroom flies. So they're associated usually around drains in your house. And they're super adorable when you can get a nice close-up photo of them. They're little fuzzy guys. There's also cellar slugs and cellar spiders. So another place that you might check for things living in your house are kind of those darker, more like cool places. And these are not my photos, but if you listen to Dr. Lauren Esposito's Academy talk yesterday, her Academy Breakfast Club talk yesterday, she talked about these little tiny scorpions. They're actually called pseudoscorpions. And these ones are either called book pseudoscorpions or house pseudoscorpions. And they eat that thing that's right next to it, which is a book louse. And so these also are inside your house and obviously associated with books and things like that. So there's a ton of interesting species in your house once you really start looking. And really, you can explore iNaturalist and kind of see what other people are finding in their houses. There's a great project on iNaturalist called Never Home Alone that you could search and see what people are finding. But I just love the fact that so many of these actually have names that are about your house. In your backyard, like I said, we're interested in finding the wild things in our backyard. And so these also, again, these are all photos that I've taken in my own backyard. Tons of weeds in your backyard. Once you start looking, they're annoying, but they are wild. So they're great to take photos of. You can also look for the things that are living in and on your plants in your backyard. So that first picture of that little cone thing is a gall, which are made by parasitic wasps that lay their eggs inside the leaves of other plants. And then the plant forms this gall around it. And so you can check like the underside of the leaves of your trees or bushes to see if you can find these. I found this adorable little crab spider in my rosemary bush the other day. So like check carefully on your plants and you can see all the things that might be living on it. Obviously, if you have some soil you can dig in, you can definitely find things like earthworms. And I've even found these super weirdo broadhead planarians in my yard multiple times now by just digging in the soil. So you can find lots of interesting wild things in your backyard, even if your backyard's not that big, by digging around or really just checking closely about in the plants in your yard. You can also, if you have things like potted plants in your backyard, this is a potted plant in my yard. Again, I don't want to take a photo of the plant itself because it's not wild, but underneath pots is a great way to find things. So you can see this is me and my dog looking underneath the pot in my backyard. She's always really interested when I start lifting things up out there to see what we can find. And under there were, those little pill bugs, little roly-polies. There's sometimes earwigs under there, sometimes worms. So that's a great place to look. I also set up a little, what we call a pit trap in my backyard. This is a nice way of capturing insects that doesn't kill them, where you can let them out afterwards. So I just took like a cottage cheese container and just dug into my soil and planted it in there. You want it to kind of be level with your soil. And then insects start walking along and they just fall in. And sure enough, this morning, I just put this out yesterday, and this morning I went and checked, and you can actually see I have some little roly-polies that fell in overnight. And the nice thing is I can photograph them and post them on iNaturalist and then dump them out again, so I'm not having to kill them to take photos of them. You can also do things to attract species to your backyard. Birds are things that people always are trying to attract to their yard, especially people who really love to see the different species in your area. So I have a little section of my backyard where I've just put up some bird feeders and some hummingbird feeders and a little thing of water. And you can definitely attract a lot of species, different species of birds by putting up different kinds of seeds. Or even if you just have a water source, you can still attract birds just with water. You can also put down a cover board in your backyard. A lot of times people do this with plywood. I don't have a big piece of plywood lying around right now, so I just use a thick piece of cardboard, which also works okay. You can see I weighed it down on the corners with just bricks and rocks I had in my backyard. If you're lucky, your cover board, the longer you leave it down, the more species you can attract to it. And you might eventually get things like salamanders or lizards that you would find underneath your cover board. You might not be that lucky, but you'll definitely, no matter what, you'll eventually have slugs and snails and things like that that will be attracted to kind of that dark and moist place under there. Will definitely take up residence down there. And you can lift up your cover board and photograph them and then put it back down again and see what you can find the next day. You can also attract species to your backyard by setting up moth lights. This is really fun, especially on warmer evenings. You can just put up a white sheet like on a wall in your backyard. It doesn't have to be a black light. You can even just use like a normal flashlight shining on it. You can attract different species with black lights though. I often do like a flashlight and a black light. And the great thing is that moths and other flying insects will be attracted to that, and they just sit there really nicely and they're easy to take photos of. So that's another great way to attract things to your backyard. So I'm going to shoot it over to Rebecca to talk some other things about things you can find in your backyard.
So thanks so much, Alison. We wanted to highlight one really awesome story. So Alison and I were talking on Twitter about how we were going to give this presentation. And one of our colleagues on iNaturalist, so an amateur naturalist and a great photographer named Carlos Velasco, who lives in Monterrey, Mexico, kind of reminded us of this story that we knew, is that he set up a project just at his house. And it's him and his family only. And over the past few years, they've been taking photos just of the things they find in their yard. And they've documented over 500 species from a pretty small yard, you can see here. And so it just kind of shows that if you pay attention, if you set up a moth light, especially, you can document a lot of species just in your yard. Next slide. You can just see some of the things that he took photos of. And one of the things I kind of wanted to remind you all about, like Alison just showed a lot of really great things that you can do to bring species to your yard. But what I've noticed, especially since I've been home these past few weeks, if you just go in your yard and sit still, like don't do anything else, like don't be walking somewhere else or digging or planting, like a lot of birds and insects are there that you might not notice if you're gardening or barbecuing or playing with your kids. But if you sit still and just pay attention, you can see a lot of things. And that doesn't take any extra planning. It just takes kind of slowing down. And that's kind of what I found when I've been walking around my neighborhood. So we recognize that not everybody has a backyard, and there's a lot of nature just in neighborhoods. So I went out this morning and just took a few pictures around my neighborhood. And I thought really hard about where I see more wild nature. So you can see these plants here. These are not wild plants, right? These are all cultivated plants that are planted by the city of San Francisco. But there's a pretty big diversity of plants here. And so the more different kinds of plants you can find, the more different kind of species are attracted to them. So these are places that you can go and do what I just said, like kind of sit still, do some of the things that Alison described, like look on the undersides of leaves, look under the bushes, look up, and just pay attention to all the different places. All right, next slide. And in parks, like in regular city parks, a lot of times there are bricks and rocks and wood that you can turn over just like Alison described. So this is a little park kind of near my house and you can see there's a brick here that I could turn over. And next slide, or next picture. And here you can see some stumps, right? So here's a stump, and so I went over and I just turned it over. Next. And you can see that there are lots of roly-polies and some slugs and other things under there. So these don't have to be things in your house. They can be things in your neighborhood. If you're turning things over though, like when you're out in nature or in city parks, just make sure as you're lifting up rocks to lift them up so the things underneath can escape away from you in case there are snakes or things that might be dangerous underneath. I mean, in city parks like this, you're probably not going to see a snake. You might see a slender salamander though. And then when you're putting it back down, just be sure that you're really careful to return it how you found it. And if there were any big things under there, to either scoop them out so they don't get squished by the boulder or whatever, or make sure that you're not putting it down on them. All right, next slide. So, like Alison said, we're looking for wild things. So this is a really good chance to look at things in your neighborhood, in your backyard, that got there on their own, like weeds, right? There are tons of different weeds that, a lot of gardeners try to get rid of, but do provide habitat for lots of really cool insects and they're habitat and they're part of our nature. And so you can document all of these things like these weeds. Next slide. When you turn things over and look under rocks, you're going to find a lot of snails and slugs. And I love snails and slugs, so I'm super happy to find them. And you can find a lot of non-native slugs, but if you're lucky, you can also find some native snails and slugs. And these records are really interesting and really important, and it's really fun to find slugs in your neighborhood. All right, next slide. And of course, under things a lot, you can find pill bugs or roly-polies. And a lot of times they look kind of like all the same, but they're not. And so by taking really good pictures, and this is something that you can do with a phone, is take a pretty good picture of a roly-poly, you can help us understand the distribution of these different species. And Alison and I like to say in our programs, like when you turn over a rock, you never know if you're going to see a really common introduced in California, introduced European snail or slug or roly-poly, but you could find a really rare native thing. And the odds are like you can find rare things pretty easily by taking pictures and by being curious and turning over and looking a lot. Next slide. So when I turn over this as I think a brick in my backyard, I, often find this common pillbug woodlouse, right, which is a really common roly-poly. And it's fun to see them. My daughter loves it, and I love finding them too. So that's what you usually find. But next slide. Last year, actually, just about this time, we were holding a BioBlitz just south of us in San Mateo County. And one of our great colleagues and friends turned over a log and found this roly-poly along with some of those other really common roly-polies that I just showed you. And she took pictures of both of them and uploaded them to iNaturalist. And next slide. And there was a big conversation like we've shown you before. Dr. Scott Laurie, who works with us and is one of the co-directors of iNaturalist, is an expert on land isopods, or these roly-polies, and noticed and identified this as this species, this Venzilio, I don't know how you pronounce it exactly, but noticed that it was this kind of really, really rare species that was originally described from the San Francisco Bay Area in the 30s, but had not been seen here since. So people had looked for it for years and years and years, and even done specific surveys trying to find this roly-poly and couldn't find it. But Jennifer, turning over a log and taking a picture, rediscovered this species for the first time in 90 years in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so it was just by looking and sharing her observation that she was able to rediscover this species. And we went back and Scott collected this species, and now it's in our collections at the Academy of Sciences. So people can research the genetics and the anatomy of this species because we have it in our collection. And it all started from turning over a log in a public park. All right. So maybe put the next one. Oh, no, don't do the next one yet, Alison. Okay. So we told you a couple stories about finding fun, wild things in your backyard or neighborhood. And Alison and I thought we would tell a couple stories about one of our most interesting finds just right around our houses. And we're hoping that you can do the same in the chat. So I'll go first and then I'll turn it over to Alison. But I think one of my most exciting finds is this little slug. These are two slugs, actually. So like I was saying, like finding introduced slugs happens all the time. I find them in my backyard all the time. But next picture, Alison. So a few years ago, I was at a birthday party in a park with my daughter. She was really little in this picture. And we were turning over rocks in the bushes and logs in the bushes instead of like playing pin the tail on the donkey or whatever else was happening. And we found these slugs at this just regular park that, like, if I turned around, I took this picture. If I turned around, there's a swing set and sand and a picnic area. But we found these reticulate tail dropper slugs, which are a pretty rare native slug in San Francisco. And it was just really fun and exciting that we could find this thing in just a regular day at the park. Turn it over to Alison to help tell her story.
Yeah, so those other two photos right there, I love the fact that I, for whatever reason, have a yard that attracts these little snakes called sharp-tailed snakes. And I think the main reason is that I have a vegetable garden in my backyard, and these little sharp-tailed snakes, the main thing they love to eat is slugs, which slugs are the bane of my existence in my garden. But I'm so happy to have these little guys. I find them pretty constantly in like the late spring and into the summer when I'm out working in the yard. They like to live underneath things. And so the one in my hand right there just kind of shows you what a cute little snake it is. But that photo right next to it, I was lifting up something in my yard and actually found 5 of them all together once, which I thought was pretty awesome. And so this for me is one of my favorite backyard species. And I'm always so excited when I can find them again, kind of like usually around May is when they start to show up. And I just know that I'm just also really happy that they're out there eating the slugs in my garden. So yeah, if you guys have seen cool stuff in your backyard or in your neighborhood, we'd love for you to add it in the chat. And then Laurel, you can decide which are the coolest ones you can tell us at the end. And turn it back to Rebecca.
So we've talked a lot about like the things that you can find and the great discoveries on iNaturalist or just serendipitous discoveries. But we wanted to show you a couple of the features that are online on a desktop or a laptop that you can't see on your phone. So this is a view of on a map of all of the observations that I've ever made. So I've made about 12,000 observations on iNaturalist, and you can see this is where I've made them all over the world. So anyone can do this. So I can look at all of Alison's observations. I can look at anyone on iNaturalist observations. And actually anyone can see your observations by searching on your username. So people can see what their friends or colleagues or family are seeing all over the world. Right, next. And you can also see, oops, this should be on the species. You can see all of the species that I've seen in order from most observed to least observed. And you can see up here at the top, the most observed things for me are starfish or sea stars and sea slugs. I'm a marine biologist. I study nudibranchs, and Alison and I do a ton of work in our local tide pools with volunteers. And so the things that I see most regularly are in the tide pools or take most pictures of most often. So you can see this for yourself or anyone else in the world. And this is really, I love this because it's like a life list for me, right? So it's a list, it's a way for me to keep track of all of the things I've ever seen. I'm a scientist, but I've never been a great like nature notebook keeper. I'm not very good at keeping track of all the things that I've ever seen on hikes. Some of my colleagues are amazing at this, but it's just not something I've ever done religiously. But taking pictures of these things and uploading them to iNaturalist is a way that I can keep track. And I do it all the time. Like whenever I'm outside, I take pictures of the plants and animals that I'm seeing. And you can search on your observations. So I can look and see, how many butterflies have I seen, and what are the most common butterflies and moths that I've seen. So you can see here, I've seen 95 species of moths and butterflies, and you can see from the most observed to least observed again. And so I can also use this to remind myself, if I want to find a picture, sometimes it's easier to go on iNaturalist and find that picture I took that one day of that one species than it is to go all the way back through all my photos. So I can remind myself and find photos that I can use when I'm giving talks like this or talking to people about cool species. And, when you upload your observations, we've showed you screens like this before, but this is an example of a butterfly, an Ackerman blue butterfly that I took a picture of, and I uploaded it. And I can see all that information that we've already told you about. But a lot of people set up projects on iNaturalist, and they aggregate data about certain things to help answer big questions. And you can see this observation of this Ackerman blue was automatically added to 2 projects. One's called eButterfly of North America, which keeps track of all of the butterfly observations in North America. And then another one that someone else set up that's called Backyard Pollinators of the Bay Area. And so they're keeping track of a certain list of species in the Bay Area. When anybody sees them, they get it pulled into a project, and it can help them keep track of observations and help them answer the questions that they're interested in.
Awesome.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to Alison to talk to you all about City Nature Challenge.
Yeah, so we wanted just to end with one really specific project that's coming up here at the end of April called the City Nature Challenge. And this is a big kind of event that we run with our colleagues in the Community Science Department at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County. And the City Nature Challenge, basically at its core, is kind of a 4-day BioBlitz of urban nature in cities around the world. And it started in 2016 just as a competition between San Francisco and Los Angeles, hence that's why it's us and the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles who organize it. But just through word of mouth, more and more cities have been hearing about it year after year and have been taking part in it now. This coming year will be the 5th year of the City Nature Challenge. And you can see we've been making increasingly more observations in more cities around the world, which has just been amazing, especially because it has all been word of mouth. And we're really excited this year because we have over 200 cities around the world who are taking part in the City Nature Challenge. You can see just from this growth, this is the number of observations that come into iNaturalist in any given week. So the platform that most of our cities use for the City Nature Challenge is iNaturalist. And so it's just so fun that, tens of thousands of people around the world do this together every year. And every year we spike the number of observations that come into iNaturalist during that week. And then the cool thing is, though, is that you can see that it never goes back down to the level it was before, that a lot of people, through participating in this project, they learn about iNaturalist, they get excited about documenting the species around them, and then they keep doing it afterwards, which is one of the things I really love about this project. So normally the way the City Nature Challenge works is that we just have amazingly passionate local organizers around the world who sign themselves up, basically. They say, hey, I'm willing to make this happen in my city. And then myself and Leela Higgins, who's the director down at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County, we give all these organizers, we give them training on how to use iNaturalist, and we give them tools and resources to basically kind of mobilize their community to go out and do this over the 4 days of the challenge. Normally, the way it looks, though, the thing that normally fuels the City Nature Challenge are these events called BioBlitzes, which Rebecca alluded to, where basically a whole bunch of people come together in one place, like a park in those cities, and they work together for a period of time to document all the species they can. And so I love this photo of just all these different BioBlitzes that have happened around the world during the City Nature Challenge. Clearly, though, most of us around the world cannot hold BioBlitzes right now, which is disappointing because it is a really nice way to meet other people who are super interested in learning more about nature and documenting the nature in cities. But we are still having the City Nature Challenge this year. It's just going to look a little different. Normally, the City Nature Challenge is like a big competition where we announce the winner, like what was the city that made the most observations, which city found the most species, which city had the most people go out and upload and make their observations or share their observations. This year, though, we've decided to embrace the collaborative side of the City Nature Challenge, where we're just encouraging people in whatever capacity they have, in whatever way follows all of their local regulations around COVID-19 and makes them personally feel safe, to participate by documenting nature in whatever way you can. And so the times to make observations, the main kind of push of the City Nature Challenge is the last weekend of April. It starts Friday. Basically, like as soon as it hits 12:01 a.m. Friday, it starts and goes all the way basically to midnight on Monday. So 4 days, April 24th to April 27th, where you can make observations. We give a week where people can work on making sure they get all the observations they made during those 4 days uploaded. And they can also help by providing identifications on iNaturalist to help get those photos down to species like we talked about earlier. And then on May 4th, we're going to announce the worldwide results. How many observations did we all make together? How many species could we find? You know, all of us just searching our homes and backyards and neighborhoods for the most part, because that's what what we can do right now, right? And so this year we're really pushing, you know, what wild species can you find inside of your home and in your yard? Luckily, Rebecca and I just talked a whole bunch about finding those species. So maybe you have some tricks and tools, tips now that you can use to go find those species during the City Nature Challenge. Can you attract some new species to your yard? We also talked about that. So we're really encouraging that for the City Nature Challenge this year. We're encouraging folks that are allowed to go walk around their neighborhoods to go and see what wild nature you can find in your own neighborhood as well. And then in places where you are still allowed to go to your parks, what nature can you find on a walk alone or with your family in your local park as well? And so instead of really holding lots of bio blitzes this year, the City Nature Challenge is really going to be about, you know, what can you personally find in those spaces that you're allowed to go to right now. Like I said, we have over 200 cities that are participating. You can go to that website, citynaturechallenge.org, to see if your city is one of those cities that's participating. But even if it's not, we're really just pushing everybody taking that weekend to document the species you can find around you. There's a ton of people who've reached out and they've said, you know, we want to promote this in our city, even though we're not an official city this year. We just want to get people outside into their backyards and making observations. And so there's going to be a lot of people doing it, regardless of if they're official city or not. And so we encourage you to do that, April 24th to April 27th. And we have this resource that kind of covers all those things we talked about earlier, this bit.ly/homecnc. We'll put it up on our last slide too. And I'm sure Laurel can add it to the chats as well. It's just a resource that kind of covers all those things we talked about looking for nature in your house and in your backyard. And finally, we just want to point out there are a couple things that you can still do that aren't about going outside. Is that, like we said, that anyone can make observations on iNaturalist. Anyone can also help with identifications. All iNaturalist pages, when you're logged onto the website, they all have this upload button up in the corner right here. And if you are, sorry, not upload, the identify button right here. We'll talk about that one first. They all have this identify tab right here in the center. And that will take you to all the observations on iNaturalist that are not research grade yet. And then you can filter them by place. You can see these are all the ones in California that aren't research grade. You can also filter it by different groups of species. Like I could just put plants right here, like show me all the plants in California that haven't made it to research grade yet, or the birds or things like that. So you can narrow down on the things that you might know and help people with their identifications. And then finally, you can also upload your old photos of nature. If you are sitting on a treasure trove of like old vacation photos or photos that you have where you kind of, you know the date and you generally know where you took them, a lot of people right now are taking this time to go and upload their old photos. So here's where I want to point out that all on iNaturalist, they up in the corner, the right corner, they have this upload page. So if you're on the website and you click that, it's basically drag and drop. You can drop a whole bunch of photos in, and you can work on getting that. Artificial intelligence actually works on this page too, so you can get suggestions for what species you saw, or you can put as much as you know about those species. These are a bunch of photos that Rebecca took in the tide pools. And the great thing is that even if you didn't have a camera that had a GPS in it, that you can actually go and you can drop a pin on a map and say, this is where I saw it. And if you're not exactly sure, like you didn't see it necessarily exactly in that spot, you can also increase this, basically what we call an accuracy bubble. You can say, I know I generally saw it in this park, so you can make the bubble big enough to cover the whole park if you don't know exactly where you saw it or the general area that you were in. And that's a great thing to do right now if you're sitting on a whole bunch of photos that you can, like I said, if you know generally the date and where you saw them, it'd be great to get those uploaded to iNaturalist as well. So with that, we're going to end it. You can reach out to either of us on Twitter. Those are both of our handles up there in the corner. And then those 4 websites are kind of the main things that we talked about today. Our citizen science page on the Cal Academy website, the iNaturalist website, City Nature Challenge website, and then that resource that we have about looking for nature in and around your home. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, you guys. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I should say too, we're going to have you back, I think on April 22nd to talk about City Nature Challenge again when we're just a couple days from getting started on it. So everyone come back for that. I love the idea of your observations forming this kind of life list or like life diary. That's really lovely. And also just say, as someone who started using this platform like not that long ago, consistently, it like once you do it, you really do start seeing things that you never saw before and thinking about the places you inhabit a lot differently. So we hope that everyone is inspired to download it and start snapping. Okay, we have questions, and I'm going to start with you. You actually addressed this pretty early on, but for lots of people who tuned in later, I think this is a great thing just to emphasize. So Amy asked, do I have to ID the species myself? I don't know what anything is.
I can answer that. So no, you don't have to know at all what you're taking a picture of, right? You just have to take a good enough picture. Like think in your mind, like, okay, I don't know anything about this, but what would someone who does need to see? And so take as close up of a picture as you can of like one thing. So like you can see this picture that's up on the screen of my backyard. Like don't take a picture like this, right? So get really, really close on one specific thing. Take a picture that's good enough that, think about someone else who knows their plants, for example, what kind of things would they want to know? And even if you don't know that, like they just want to see the parts, right? So they want to see the flowers, the leaves, the fruits, if there are any, anything that has like identifying information. And you can upload more than one photo with your observation. And you can leave it blank. Like you can enter nothing and just upload it and it will be unknown. But even if you don't know anything, Amy, like you actually know a lot more than you think. So you know if something's a bird or a plant, right? You can just write plant. You can just write bird. You can just write snails and slugs. So you can take the core little bit of information you have about the natural world, and that helps direct your observation to experts online, amateurs, or anyone on iNat who knows those taxa, because it is a social network. So a lot of people have alerts that send them every picture of a bird from California, for example, and they can ID it immediately. So if you put bird on it, it gets it to them faster.
And I will add that if you didn't see the beginning too, iNaturalist also has a super cool computer vision or artificial intelligence that if you're connected to data, when you take a picture in the app, it will actually give you some suggestions based on what it looks like and what's nearby you too.
And sometimes if you choose the wrong one, like if you're really wrong, that also attracts a lot of attention and people will correct you really quickly.
But kindly, right?
Kindly, gently. But yeah, people don't like to see like really wildly incorrect IDs either.
Yeah. This is related. So we have a Rebecca who asked, if you aren't sure about something, is it helpful to guess or should you only list things that you're absolutely sure of?
I'd say for that, if you're not sure, and especially if you're like looking at those suggestions iNaturalist gives you, if it's pretty sure, it'll always give you like a higher level suggestion. So you don't actually have to pick a species. It might give you a genus or a family. So you could start with that and just say, I'm just going to say, put that in. But it is useful, even if you don't look like any of those look right to you, to still say like what Rebecca said, to say, this is a plant, or, I know this is an insect, or I know this is a reptile. Is still really helpful so that the people who know those things can find it faster when you upload it to iNaturalist.
Yeah, and there really are. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's just really important to like, you don't worry about being wrong, right? So this is one of the things that I really had to get over. Like, right, I'm a professional biologist. I have a PhD, like I should know everything. Like, actually, no, like I don't know a lot. And being willing to admit that and just say, like, I don't know what plant this is. I know it's a flowering plant, or I know it's in this family, or just say what you are confident in and go with that, and people will help you and you get to learn and become better and better. And for me, I often learn best when I'm wrong, because someone on iNaturalist will kindly tell me why I'm wrong and what I should notice next time to make a better ID.
Yeah, that's what I noticed too about people kind of setting you straight, is it tends to come with some additional information. It's not just like, no, it's this. It's like, it's this because of these things. And that's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay. And also just like, there are genuinely people out there just like waiting to identify stuff, right? Like you're still helping, like you're doing someone a favor and doing nature a favor, even if you don't know anything except plant.
Exactly.
Okay, so you kind of talked about this a little bit, but Sarah is asking about the types or ranges of photos that are helpful for documenting a specimen, and specifically whether it's helpful to take multiple images for one observation.
Yeah, definitely. Like Rebecca was saying, if you imagine like a tree, for example, like it's great to get a photo of that whole tree so people have a sense of like how big it is and the general shape. Mm-hmm. But it's hard to identify a tree from a giant, from a really far away photo of a tree. So you can, on the app itself, you can always choose to add more photos. And that's when it's nice to get up close and get pictures of those leaves, or if it has any fruits or flowers, to take photos of those too.
Okay, great. And so this is a question from Daniel about projects that you mentioned. And he's wondering if anyone can set one up, or if there's a bar or some kind of requirements for starting a project.
So anyone can set up a project, but I want to caveat that with like, you don't have to set up a project, right? So projects are really saved searches. So if you're really interested in like seeing all of the, flowers or all of the plants of Milwaukee, for example, you could just search on that. You don't need to create a project, because a project is really just gathering that and giving you a URL. Mm-hmm. So if you're interested in learning something, I would start with searching. But if you're really want to set up a project and you want to aggregate data, you want to communicate to the community that you're doing a project, you want to give people a URL to find, you want to communicate with the people that have made observations that are in your project, then you should can create a project. So projects are just a saved search, but you can set the rules on that search. So you can say, I only want it to be in this place. I want it to be at this time in this place. I want it to be only these kinds of species, only these taxa. Like I only want it to be reptiles, or I only want it to be butterflies. You can choose. You can also set up projects that are just people. So if I just wanted a contest a project that was just the observations that I made and Alison made and you made, Laurel, we could set up a project that was just us, like in a certain time period, like over the next month, who's going to see the most in their house. Like we could set something like that up. Right. So I think that I would start with searching. Anyone can make a project, but I would think about whether or not it's necessary for what you want to do. And maybe Alison can talk about the other kind of projects. There's another kind of projects as well, besides just the kind I described that are called collection projects.
Yeah, and I will say that, use that Explore tab on iNaturalist to kind of see the searches that you can already do to look at the intersection of place and species and time. You can do that all just with the Explore tab. There's also projects called umbrella projects, which are projects that actually aggregate a whole bunch of other projects together, which if you search for the City Nature Challenge, that's how we kind of keep track of all the different cities that are participating. And then there are some older projects called traditional projects that you usually have to join if you want to add your photos to them. And so those are ones that you can't actually do just through a saved search. Like maybe people are interested. There's some cool ones about like the weird things that you find in nature, like things that are albino or things that are, have like extra tentacles or stuff like that. And that really takes users knowing that project exists and adding their projects to them or adding their photos to them. So there's a few different type of projects out there, but normally in things you're interested in, you can get to by using that Explore tab on iNaturalist. Okay, great. And Jacqueline has a high level question. How many people are making these observations, and in what countries, basically? Ooh. Yeah, so there's almost 1 million folks that have made what we call verifiable observations, so observations that do actually have a photo and that have locations right and stuff like that. And they make them all over the world. I don't think there's a single country that doesn't have an iNaturalist, at least one iNaturalist observation in it. There's crazy observations, like such cool stuff, like people are finding down in Antarctica. There's observations from the middle of the ocean. it's worldwide, and it's pretty amazing. Like about 33 million observations, I think, about now from all over the world.
That's so cool. You also inadvertently answered a question from Tyson, who asked specifically whether there had been observations at the North Pole or in Antarctica. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and anyone can go on iNaturalist and explore the data. So if you're really interested, it's also kind of like an armchair or like kitchen table travel, right? So if you right now can't go anywhere, you can go, like maybe you had to cancel your trip to Hawaii, right? Because you can't travel right now. You can go to Hawaii and you can look at all the observations that have been made there, and you can search and see what other people saw, and kind of like fantasize about what you'll see when you do get to go on your trip.
Yeah, so especially the stuff that people upload from underwater, like the scuba divers. That's such cool stuff that people upload.
Yeah.
And there's a trick, actually, if you want to see really good photos. So when you're doing the searching, there's a filter box, and you can search for popular, which means people have favorited it on iNaturalist. And a lot of times the things people favorite are amazing photos or just like super cool in some way. So that's a way to get kind of like a highlights reel if you're just looking to find good photos.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. Everyone should do that, because that's where I think the mind-blowing stuff comes in. And actually that connects to, so Skylar, we know you, but I'm going to ask your question anyways, who asked what your favorite, so for each of you, what's your favorite iNat observation to date?
Like anybody's iNat observation? Or my own personal?
No, I think like you personal. Like Alison, would it be the wolf eel head? Like just in terms of like sensational.
That wolf eel head was pretty amazing. I can go with that. That's a good one. Like, thanks for reminding me of that one, Laurel. Yeah, we found just the head of a wolf eel in the tide pools, and it had amazing pink teeth. So if you search for me on iNaturalist, my iNaturalist username is Kestrel. So you can search for that and search for wolf eel, and you will find that photo.
And we can also put we did a video about it, so we can drop a link to the video in the comments section too, so people can check it out. What about you, Rebecca?
Oh my gosh, it's so hard. Like, do you have one to remind me about? Because I'm like, so I can think of like a couple fun ones maybe. I mean, I think when I first started using iNaturalist, one of our great friends that we met actually through this work, Liam O'Brien, studies butterflies, and he, really got me paying attention to butterflies more and like their host plants in San Francisco. And so I was on a BioBlitz, and I was looking on this host plant that he had taught me about, and I found one of the little caterpillars of a gray hair streak butterfly, and it was just, for me, it was one of the first things that really helped me realize like what a better naturalist I was becoming through the work that I was encouraging other people to do. So it was like a really good example of something I would have noticed, but I learned from him to pay attention in a different way. So that's just like a nice story, but I don't know if it's my favorite observation. I'd have to think a little.
Well, maybe we'll see because you're both coming back to do some nudibranch related talks as well. So maybe we'll see some of your favorites in that.
Yeah, that's probably pretty likely. So.
Okay, so this is an interesting question, probably something a lot of people are wondering, from Jason. If my neighbor is making spider observations in their backyard and I do the same thing, aren't we going to see the same things? And is that really valuable to science?
Yeah, it totally is. iNaturalist is not about like trying to understand like abundance of things. It's really about this species occurred here on this day. And so it is interesting if you're finding it in your backyard and your neighbor is finding it in their backyard. That tells us something. There's something interesting about your backyards that are attracting these spiders there. And so it's totally fine. Like even if you're out, walking with like your family and someone else really wants to make an observation of the exact same thing that you're making an observation of, that's totally fine because that information is still the same. This species occurred here on this day. Doesn't matter how many times people take a picture of it.
Right. Okay. That's good context. I'll ask you, let's see, I'll ask you just 3 or 4 more. And then anyone whose question we didn't get to, we can loop back later and try to answer it in comments. But for now, Ginny asks, for people who live in the Bay Area, are there particular things we should be on the lookout for, or how do we know if something needs more documentation?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
So one thing, I mean, the work that we do in the tide pools, like I can answer that really easily for marine species because we make like a most wanted species list, and we are particularly on the lookout for certain species, but I recognize that's not where people are making observations, especially right now.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a couple of things you can do. Like one thing is you can look around your neighborhood, like let's say your city or your county in the Bay Area, and you can see what people have observed by looking like at plants or insects, and you can see maybe like look for places that there aren't a lot of observations, like near you, like maybe the park like right across that you can walk to right now because you're not supposed to be driving really far. Maybe there aren't a lot of observations there. Mm-hmm. So you can fill in some place gaps and just like document as much as you can in places that don't have a lot of observations. That's like the easiest thing to do. Otherwise, I think that you can also look and see if there are projects. It's a little trickier on iNaturalist, but to find projects that people might have in the Bay Area because then they're interested in those observations. So if you've already made observations in the Bay Area, you can look at your observations and see if they've been added to any projects like I was showing you earlier. And then see what else they want to know for those projects. Those are like one roundabout way, but one pretty easy way. I don't know if Alison has any other suggestions.
No, I think those are great.
Yeah, and those could apply to really any place, right?
Yeah, any place.
The Bay Area. Yeah.
Really looking for places that there aren't observations is the best thing to do because you're adding new knowledge that nobody's added to iNaturalist before.
Right. Okay, cool. This one's a nice question too. Mary Beth asks, can you explain a little bit more about the connection between taking photos like this and how that helps with conservation?
Yeah, so there's a few ways that iNaturalist data are used most regularly. One is just understanding kind of globally where species are occurring right now. You can imagine that if someone thinks that due to climate change, species are changing their ranges, potentially, you know, maybe where people were finding them in the past is different to where people are finding them right now. You know, taking those photos is you know, taking photos of where things are found right now is really important. So people can compare. They can go to that site GBIF that Rebecca talked about earlier. They can see museum specimens that were found in the past, where people were finding them in the past and where people are finding them now. And that can help us make decisions based on, you know, if the species looks like it's moving north or it's moving up in elevation. That can help us make decisions to think about where are the places that we need to protect to keep that species, you know, around in the future. And then also really locally, a lot of parks and cities use iNaturalist data to better understand the species that they manage right now. So a park that needs to make decisions about, you know, should we go and pull a population of invasive plants? Like, well, knowing where those invasive plants are is really important. Or, you know, if you need to decide where to put a new trail, understanding that you're not going to be, you know, creating a trail through a patch of super rare things is really important too.
Right. Okay, great. And just in general, like at a very high level, like all conservation decisions kind of are inherently just, for starters, informed by knowing what's there or being able to prove that you know what's there, right? So this data really is invaluable because there's often not enough people to go out and do that work. So
exactly.
Okay, I think this is a nice question to end with because this is like a really cool way people can kind of start using iNaturalist consistently and really feel that social aspect in real life as well. And this is obviously something that won't happen again until we're all back out. But how do we find out, Catherine wants to know, if there are BioBlitzes near us? And if there aren't any, can we organize one?
So in the Bay Area, so we organize a lot of BioBlitzes normally. They're all been postponed for now, but you can look on our website. So the Cal Academy Citizen Science website, we have a list of upcoming BioBlitzes, and you can follow along there to see what we're hosting. And I'm guessing that depending on how long we cannot have events, like we might think of some creative ways that we can have virtual BioBlitzes with like specific goals. So look there for that as well. Yes, and anyone can host a BioBlitz. So we actually, and maybe I'll put this up on our website so it's a little easier to find. We have a guide to how to host a BioBlitz that we've made. And so we're happy to share that. But really it's like, okay, once you can do this safely and legally, gather people in one place and you all work together to document as many species as you can in that place using iNaturalist. There are a couple like logistic things to help you be able to see those data by making a project. But really, that's what you're doing when you do a BioBlitz. And so you just have to say, this is the place, this is the time. We're all working together to document as much as we can. But we'll put that on our website. It's there now, but it's a little buried. So I'll daylight it for everyone so they can host their own BioBlitz. And you can also do your own personal BioBlitz just with your family or the people you live with that you're allowed to be close to right now.
And do you want to remind people what webpage is the best kind of one-stop shop for this?
So I think it's just the starting point would just be Cal Academy Citizen Science. If you Google that right there, calacademy.org /citizen science.
Okay, cool. Oh, okay, so we'll stop there just for the moment. But again, if we didn't get to your question, we'll try to circle back and answer it later. Thank you both so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, can't wait to have you back. And I will say too, for everyone who watched, like, I hope you're actively downloading iNat right now and planning little mini outdoor BioBlitzes with your family and thinking about setting up light shoots in your backyard and taking walks and stuff like that. But also, if you enjoyed the talk, our next one, so it will be this Monday morning, April 6th. And it's going to be awesome. We're going to have Dr. Louise Rocha on, who is our curator of ichthyology. And he's going to talk about coral reefs. He's one of the world's coral reef experts. And he's also a member of our mesophotic deep dive team, which is one of the few scientific efforts in the world that uses special equipment to drop as deep as 500 feet to explore new species and also just to see how those deeper reefs are doing. He's also an incredible underwater photographer. So visually, this will probably be a treat as well. And yeah, so that's it for now. And we hope you're inspired. We hope you enjoyed it. You can see the full lineup of upcoming Breakfast Club speakers at the schedule. We'll drop in comments and we'll see you back here Monday. Thank you too. Thanks everyone who watched. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye,
Take care.